are in listen-only mode.
Yeah. Hello everyone. Hi. Yeah. Any questions before we get started? Hello. Last day I didn't send you the notes, alright, and even the recording was not uploaded. I will do it today. Alright. So what exactly Spring? See, I know Spring is a framework, but there were different modules in it. So what do you mean by Spring IOC? What exactly the IOC stands for, and what is the significance of IOC? Alright, IOC stands for Inversion of Control. IOC stands for Inversion of Control, and what is this inversion of control is, don't create object, rather specify how the object need to be created, and at runtime we can inject object. So if you might have observed the yesterday's examples of the bookstore, it was something like this. There was a controller. So inside the controller, I was creating a service object. And I'm making use of the service object. Then inside the service, I was creating the object of the DAO, and I'm making use of the DAO. Now the thing is here, why I was doing this, I'm actually separating the logics according to the job they do. Then I put them in a separate classes. Then I create the object and invoke the method, like get user or get books. Place order, or you can say insert into purchase books. Right. So what is happening is I was doing this to accomplish loose coupling. But the concern was you accomplish loose coupling, but you are creating an object. In order to create an object, you need a respective dot class file. Now, for me, this is also a kind of dependency. I'll tell you why. Because now I have an interface called IDAO and I have a DAO object. Now, interface is an IDAO. Interface is an IDAO and I have two implementations. One is Hibernate DAO implementation. But Hibernate comes later. So first I had with JDBC implementation. So after JDBC implementation, I started using the application. But later on, I want to switch to Hibernate. So what should I do? I should go back and modify. The service program. So the service program first got JDBC DAO. I want to switch from to Hibernate. So I need to modify the service program. Is there any way without like this, instead of creating the object like this, why won't you inject implementation object at runtime? Why don't you put the object at runtime instead of doing at the writing? Because when you are developing the code, instead of writing what object needs to be created, why don't you inject the object at runtime? If you want to do that, then we need to follow a principle called IOC, Inversion of Control. As I said earlier, don't create object. Specify how the object needs to be created, which can be injected at runtime. Dependency injection, that is injecting the object at runtime. It can be injected, there are actually three ways, but Spring supports only two: constructor, setter, method. Spring supports the first two. So either you can inject the object using a constructor, or you can inject the object using a setter method. So using constructor injection you can do, setter injection also you can do. It's up to you. Whatever the injection means, it's up to you in the sense. Setter injection is more powerful because you can change the value at runtime. Setter injection, I mean you can also change the value later on. If you use a constructor injection, then you need to create an object to change it. If it is a setter injection, you can also set the value again. So there is advantage of the setter injection. Now I am going to demonstrate how do we inject the object at runtime using a constructor injection and also using a setter injection. I am going to demonstrate how do we inject an object at runtime using a constructor injection or setter injection. That's what I would like to discuss. So I have small applications, right? I did them before because I need to do some XML configuration. I did these examples before because I need to do some XML configuration. They're very simple actually. And I'm going to help you with a jar file which consists of the jars related to the Spring framework. I have few of them. Okay. So I have my first application here. It's a standalone application. Whatever you have here, it's a standalone application. The first one is a standalone application. That is the normal Java application. New project, Java project. And give whatever the name you want to give to it. Whatever the name you want to give to the project, you can give it. And just let's finish. Then we need to add the jar files to the application. Because it's a standalone application, you need to do a build part. Since it is a standalone application, you need to do a build part. Just give me a minute. Yeah. So since it is a standalone application, you need to do a build part. So right click, configure the build part. So just see here, you'll see some list of jar files needed, but the location is not available. See, Antler, logins, ASM, beans, context, context support, core and expression. I just remove them. Add external jars. Antler, login, ASM, beans, support, context, core, expression. Open. Okay. Then you got rid of that exclamation mark. That is, everything seems to be good. Now, this is the example which I discussed yesterday. There is a class A and the class A got two string variables. Then I am using a constructor to set the values. I am using a constructor to set the values. So when I create object of this class, the expected constructor is taking two string arguments to set the values. Then I have a method which is printing the values. So it's a very simple one. Then I have another class called B. It got a string and it also got a A connect. If you look at the B class is composing a object, means it consists of A. The class B comprises of A. The class B comprises of A and you have a string message. And if you look at this, there is a class B, there is a constructor taking arguments. Then there is a method M2. From the M2 method, you are invoking the M1 method of A and you are printing a message. Now, if you observe, in your project folder, there is an XML file called application context.xml. You can choose any name for this XML document. You can choose any name for this XML document, application context.xml. Then what I am doing here, I am creating a bean. In the sense I am creating a, I am specifying here how the object needs to be created. So I am saying that A1 is an object of type class A which belongs to Virtusa package. Now Because if you look at the a.java code, what do you have in the a.java class? Two variables and a constructor initializing the values. So in this XML document, when you are creating the object of the class A, then you are expected to pass two arguments. So how do you pass? There is a tag called constructor-r and value equal to. So there are two arguments and your bean tag is closed. Now look at the class B. Class B got what? A reference of type A and a variable of type string. And just look at the way I create the object B. It's got an object A1 and hello vertices. Right. Both are constructor arguments. But one of them is in a value attribute, for other one it is in a reference attribute. Because A is of what type? A is not a normal standard type, right? A is not a primitive type. If it is a primitive type, you take a value attribute. If it is a class type, you take a reference attribute. That's it. Now you specify in an XML document how the objects need to be created. Then you have a program to run it. Here we go. So here the way, if you remember the Hibernate, we did what? New configuration.configure.build session factory.open session. The same way, we are creating an object of bean factory. Actually, there are two types of containers. One is a bean factory container and other one is application context container. Bean factory is very small in size, suitable for those devices, those equipments which got very less in memory, and it is very limited. Whereas if you take application context, it's powerful. It is powerful. It is more in size. So it suits large scale applications or enterprise applications. Then if you look at this here, after creating the bean factory object, and on the bean factory you are calling a method called getBean. And what is the object name? B1. So look at the XML document. Do we have a B1? Yes. Then we get that B1 object, and on that B1 object you are calling a method M2. And if you see, from the method M2 you are calling a method M1. So let's run this to see the output. So without creating any object for the class B, when I say creating any object, you are not using your new operator, new operator, to create objects of the class B and of the object of the class A. But still you succeed in invoking the methods of it. Because instead of creating the object, a container, the bean factory container, has injected the objects for you into your main program. So guys, any questions on this, or is it clear?
Hello, Arun.
Yeah, hi.
Hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I can hear you.
Can you give us some examples? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Can you give us some examples as to how this will help in, what's the word you were using, isolation or independence? It's just the new operator we are not using.
Yeah.
I was thinking of some examples like how.
Yeah. So if you remember our yesterday's example, I was creating the object of the DAO implementation class, right?
Yes.
Now, imagine there was a two implementations. There is a JDBC implementation as well as a Hibernate implementation. Now, if you want to switch from JDBC implementation to Hibernate implementation, what do? You just need to go back and modify your service program, right?
Yes.
Now, instead of that, if you use the Spring framework, do you need to modify service program?
Okay.
Okay, let me just switch to there. There we go. Bookstore. If you observe this, you are creating a, now this is a JDBC DAO object, right? Now I am
Right.
using JDBC here. Okay. Now tomorrow I want to switch from JDBC to Hibernate. Then what? I need to modify my service program. I need to modify my service.java program. So when I modify a Java program, I need to recompile it, right? Whereas instead of this, imagine that you have something like this. Bean factory dot get bean, and you just say, now what happens? In the XML, if in the XML, if IDAO is representing a JDBC, you are injecting a JDBC DAO object. In the XML, if your IDAO is representing a Hibernate, you are injecting a Hibernate object. Or in your XML, if your IDAO is representing Hibernate is another ORF map. So if you are representing a Hibernate, then you are injecting Hibernate. So this is referring what? This actually is configured in a XML file. So in the XML, if it is pointing to JDBC, it's JDBC DAO. If it is pointing to Hibernate, it's a Hibernate DAO. If it is pointing to Hibernate, it's a Hibernate DAO. So your service program is not getting affected. Only your XML file needs some modifications. Is this clear, or do you have a question?
No, it's clear. Thank you.
So what did we saw so far was, we saw constructor injection. We saw constructor injection. In case if you want to do setter injection, let's see how. So just go to the same example. Yeah. I enable this setter method. And I comment this out. So I have a setter method for both, and I commented out the constructor. Now here we go. Go to the XML document. Now I enable these things. And I comment the constructor part. Done. So when you want to do setter injection, what you do? Property and the name of the property, whatever the value you want to pass. Property, name of the property, and whatever the value you want to pass. That's it. this is your setter injection. So you will have a setter method and you inject it using a property tag. That is, you pass the values using a property tag. Still your application works. Even in the B.Java also, what we do is, instead of constructor, we can also go for getters and setters. Setters. Right? So we just say setter. Fine. You have a setter. Go back to your XML. Here it was a constructor argument, right? It was constructor argument. So what do we do? Instead of constructor, I want to use property. What is the name of the property? A1. For A1, you need to do reference. What is the other one? Other one was B.Java. Yeah, it's a message. You want to pass value. That's it. Run it. Oh, there is some issue. Invalid property A1 of B class. Let's see. Oh, it's only A. What is the property name here? It's A. So let's go back to the XML. It's A, and you want to pass value as A1. Done. So either you can inject using a constructor or you can inject using a setter. So the most means out of the both, the good solution is your setter injection, because if you have a setter method, you can change its value later on. As I was talking about, tomorrow I wanna inject JDBC DAO. I wanna inject Hibernate DAO instead of JDBC DAO. So this setter one will help you. So this is what one example of achieving IOC, right? Achieving through a dependency injection, constructor injection as well as a setter injection. Now I made use of what? Bean factory. Now let me demonstrate the usage of the application context. Observe here, when I was using Bean factory, where is your XML file? Your XML file is in the project. The XML file is in the project when I am making use of the Bean factory. XML file is in the project when I am making use of the Bean factory. Now let's look at the next example where my XML file is in the source folder. My XML file is in the source folder. Now in this case I am using a application context. I am not using the Bean factory, I am using the application context. Same set of jar files. Let's add them to the class file. Antler, logging. See, this jar management is very critical. Adding extra jars also a problem, adding less jars also a problem. And the thing is, if you keep adding more and more jar files, the size of the project increases. The size of the application increases, which is also not accepted. Now, look at this part. I have a class A and I got a method. Now what I am trying to do here is, I got it. See, it's a very simple thing because we only have a normal bean tag. There is only one bean tag. And what is the object name A of what class? And what is the scope here? I specify it as a singleton. In the last example, I didn't discuss about the scope. In the last example, I didn't discuss about the scope, but in this example, I'm talking about the scope. And also, my XML document is in the source folder. So I'm not creating a bean factory object, rather I'm creating a application context object. Rather I'm creating a application context object. I'm creating a application context object. Class path XML application context. Now what I'm doing here? Using that application context object, I'm calling a method getBean and I got the object A. Again I'm calling the getBean, got the object B. Means I'm calling the getBean method twice. So do I get two different objects or I'm going to get the same object? Do I get two different objects or I'm going to get the same object? Am I going to get the two different objects or am I going to get the same objects? Let's see. So you got the message both are equal because I am getting the same objects. Let me go back to the XML and modify it to. Now let me run the main method. So what is happening? When you do singleton, it returns the object, same object every time you invoke. But if you use a new operator, every time you invoke it, it creates a new object for you. If you use a new operator, every time you invoke it, it creates a new object for you. But here, what is happening? You have the option. If you specify it as a singleton, it returns the same object every time. If you put it as a prototype, it gives you a different object every time. Mostly we go with singleton only. And if you don't specify anything, equal. That is the default value is what? Singleton. The default is singleton. If you specify singleton, it's singleton. If you specify it as a prototype, it gives you a different object every time you invoke the getBean method. Yeah. Any questions on this part? Alright. Yeah. Let me do another example. It's mostly the similar kind of example. Okay. Again, for the same application, I'm adding the jar files. You need an anchor. You need a login. ASM beans. Support, context, store, and expression. Here we go. So what I did was, this is a very small example. I have an interface. To understand the real purpose of your Spring framework, I did this example. So I have an interface called Quizmaster. I have an interface called Quizmaster, and it got a method called pop question. I have an interface called Quizmaster, and it got a method called pop question. Now, this interface is being implemented by both Struts Quizmaster and also a Spring Quizmaster. So Quizmaster is an interface. It's implemented by Struts Quizmaster as well as the Spring Quizmaster. Right. So you have a methods, you override them. Because when you implement an interface, you are expected to override. So you have an interface and there are two implementations to it. Now, you have a service. Look at this. This is an interface and it's a reference, and you are storing an implementation object. You are storing an implementation object into this interface reference, and when you say pop question, what will be the output? You are storing what object? Spring Quizmaster object. So when you say pop question, what will be the message? Of course, it will be what? The message will be, are you new to the Spring? But if I want to switch to struts, then I need to modify this. Now I get a message as, are you new to the struts? But this is manually you are editing the code. This is manually you are editing the code. Instead, why don't you use this? The Spring framework. You got a service, you have an interface, and you got a setter method, and you also have a constructor. It's up to you. You can inject it using a setter or you can inject it using a constructor. Now in the XML, if you observe, I have a Spring Quizmaster object, I have a Start Quizmaster object, then I have a service. It is taking what? I have a service, and the constructor of that service is taking what object? Struts Quizmaster object. So when you run this program, what is expected? Are you new to the struts? What I can do here, that's it. You go back and run your code. Right? This is what actually I was trying to tell you by showing that JDBC example. So you have an interface. An interface can have different implementations. It can be a Spring implementation or it can be a Hibernate implementation. So your XML is injecting Spring JDBC, then it works for JDBC. If it is injecting Hibernate, it works for Hibernate. Whereas if you don't have this IOC principle, then you need to modify your service program. If you modify a Java program, you are supposed to compile it. And after compiling, suppose it is a web application, and you have a Java program modified, then you need to compile and you need to redeploy. You need to compile and you need to redeploy. But here you don't need to do that, right? Because you are not modifying your Java program, you are just modifying the XML. Restart your server, it will take care of if you modify XML. Yeah. Any questions on this? Or it's good so far? Okay. So same IOC concept with Spring JDBC and Spring ORM we're gonna discuss. IOC we're gonna discuss, and again because IOC is applicable everywhere now. IOC is applicable everywhere now. Sure, I'll do that. So I have an interface, and we all know interface will have what? Abstract methods. Now this interface is being implemented by both the classes, Spring Quizmaster as well as Struts Quizmaster. So an interface has two implementations. An interface has two implementations. One is a Spring implementation, other one is a Hibernate implementation. One is a Spring implementation, other one is a Hibernate implementation. Sorry, Struts implementation. Now what I want to do is, I want to inject, I don't want to write a Java program. There is one Java program here. I have an interface reference. It is holding what object here? Struts object. Since it is holding struts object, when I invoke the method, I get the message as are you new to the struts? But in case if I want other method, are you new to the Spring, then what should I do? I should modify this. So do you think this can happen at runtime? You sit on the server end and you want to modify the program. And after modifying the program, then what you need to do? You need to recompile it and you need to redeploy it. But this will not happen at runtime. This will not happen on the server side. Nobody sits on the server side to modify the program and compile and run. So that's what we were aiming at actually in the Spring. Don't create objects using a new operator. Don't create objects using a new operator. Rather, find a way to inject an object. So how? There is an XML document. Then you have a service, and this service needs what? You have a service, and the service got an interface reference. The service got an interface reference, and for that interface reference, you have a setter method, or you have a constructor. It's up to you. You can use setter injection, or you can also use constructor injection. You can use a setter injection, you can use a constructor injection. It's purely up to you. Now what you need to do is, in the XML document, what is that you are injecting? You are injecting a Spring Quizmaster object. You are injecting a Spring Quizmaster object. So when you run your program, what will be the message? Are you new to the Spring? But go back to the XML, and why don't you modify the Spring Quizmaster to struts? You are modifying the XML, not the Java program. This is the feasibility of IOC principle. This is why we call IOC principle as very powerful. Because whatever the object you inject, what is dynamic polymorphism? It's like dynamic polymorphism for you, right? Because you never know what is going to be message. It depends on the object it is storing. If it is storing a struts object, you get the message as a struts. If it is storing a Spring object, you get the message as a Spring. But at what time you are storing the object? You are storing the object at runtime. When you invoke the method getBean, then you get the object. Yeah. Oh, was it a question, the Quizmaster? Okay, got it. I hope, is it clear or you still have a question? Yeah, Ishta, I unmuted you.
Yeah, Arun, I had a question about how XML is compiled at what time, because as you said, if we manually change the Java program, we have to recompile it. But if we change the bean file, the XML file, then is it not compiled?
No,
Does the
you just need to redeploy it.
Okay.
You just need to redeploy the application, but that is also not accepted. Okay, but I'll tell you the other way.
Okay.
So if you look at this program 1, now what is happening here? You get Quizmaster service, right? Look at this. So modifying XML is also not accepted. Okay, so look at this part. You got a Quizmaster service. Now what is the object which is injected? Starts right. Okay. What is the object which is injected here now?
Right.
Struts object is injected, right? So look at this part. Okay, fine.
Yes.
Are you new to the struts? So let me design the application in such a way. Let's forget this for time being.
Actually, Arun, there is a lag in your voice and the screen.
Yeah,
So
true.
by the time you speak something, the screen does not appear.
Actually, there is a poor internet connection I'm having actually. So next week probably I move to a better place where I get a good broadband connection.
Okay. Okay.
What quest? right? Now if you see, I created an object. I'm trying to fetch an object, right? But I know what is this. It's of struts type, right? The equals method is struts. So what I do is, but I don't know what object is being injected here, because in this XML file there is a bean tag. Now this bean tag is being injected struts object using constructor. So being a programmer, I am familiar with that. So here I'll say ask question. But in case if the user enters spring, then what should I do? So I have a setter method. Sorry. So what I do is quizmaster service dot. Right. I have a setter method. Okay, so here I'll do this stuff. Context dot get bean. I know this object name. Get that object. But actually, who needs this object? Now where should I put this Spring Quizmaster object?
In the setter method.
Yeah, so now what will be the message? Right,
Are you new to Springs?
I give a message. Okay. So nowhere you see in this code that I created a struts object or string object. I'm not using any new operator. Okay. But what I'm doing here is I'm just getting the object. Right. Now where is these objects are configured in your XML file? Then I fetch them and I do it. But no, do you see anything like new operator here? No. Do you see anything like new operator here? No. And other thing is, you might be wondering, why should I do this? Why should I put everything configured in XML and why should I do this? I can happily create a struts object here and string object here and get the things done, right? I come again. Instead of doing this get bean, we can happily create an object and get our job done. But why are we doing this? Why are we configuring in XML and why are we invoking a get bean? Because if you look at the J2EE architecture, so far we were working on, I hope you guys can see this MS Paint application. There is a client.
Yes.
And you have a server. So far we had a web container. So far we had a web server. So this is a client browser and this is your web server. This is your web server. In this web server, you have servlets or whatever. And you also have your Java programs here. You got your JDBC program here. You got your connection program. Right. So your web container is responsible for these things. Servlets. So the web server got web container. The web container is taking care of the servlets. The web container is taking care of the servlets. And these servlets will talk to what? The DAO program or whatever you have. Connection program. So they are in the same location, right? So you can create inside a servlet, you can create a DAO object. I hope you can see this paint completely now with connection and DAO. There is a web server. The web server got a web container. The web server got a web container. And this web container got servlets. And these servlets, whenever they need a database connectivity, they just talk to the DAO. That is, inside a servlet program, you can create a DAO object. You can create a DAO object. But the concern next is, instead of web server, there will be another kind of server called application servers. Application servers. Now when you have this application servers, these programs are not deployed into something else. We call it as an EJB container. Now we are using a IOC container. Think. We have a EJB container earlier. Alright, now we are using IOC container. The thing is, it's not like servlet directly talk to DAO now. The web container need to talk to EJB container. Means they are not in the same place. Now this web container will not be able to create object of a DAO. It won't be able to say new DAO. This web container need to talk to the EJB container. There is something called as an JNDI lookup. There is something called as JNDI lookup. JNDI, Java Naming Directory Interface. Now, in this case, what you need to do, this web container looks up at the EJB container, and EJB container will give you that object. And the object will be used by your servlets to get the things done. Now in this case, you will not be able to create object, right? You have to look up and fetch the object. So when I am looking up and fetching the object, he can give you a EJB object or it can be any other object. When you are looking up and fetching the object, it can be any object they may return you. So suppose the servlets need a database connectivity or a program to insert the data into a database. So you can have a JDBC DAO to insert, you can have a Hibernate DAO to insert. So now you are looking up into another container for an object. So those people can give you anything. They can give you a Hibernate DAO, they can give you a JDBC DAO, whatever. So what do you think? It is good to use new operator, or rather you keep your options open? So when you say get bean, and this label is representing some object. So it may represent a Hibernate DAO or JDBC DAO, whatever is given to you that gets injected. So it doesn't mean that if you are modifying XML you don't need to do anything. If you modify XML, you just need to redeploy your application. Whereas if you modify your Java program, then you need to recompile it, then you need to redeploy it. And the concern is, if you want to modify your Java programs, you don't know where all you used it. If you want to modify your Java program, suppose there may be 4 places where you might have used this new operator for creating objects. And you search all the 4 places and modify there. Whereas instead of modifying at 4 places, if everywhere you are using getBean concept, you just need to modify the XML document. Now here, I know that when I create QuizMaster service object, QuizMaster service is consuming a JDBC DAO. And you modified every program. There are 4 places where you use the QuizMaster service. And 4 places you created JDBC DAO object. Then you need to modify 4 Java programs. Whereas instead of writing those new operators, if you might have written the code this way, then what you need to modify? A XML document. And if you modify that XML document, once, whatever the places you change, whatever the places you want to affect, that will take place.
Okay.
So did you got the last point, right? The last point was simple. If I have 4
Yes.
instances, suppose, okay, there is a there is a service method. It got a 4 methods. I hope you can see the notepad. And in the notepad there is a service class. In that we got 3 methods: insert, delete, get. So here I am creating a JDBC DAO. Then I am calling insert. I'm calling a insert. I'm calling a delete. I'm calling a get. Now if I want to use Hibernate DAO, if I want to use Hibernate DAO instead of the JDBC DAO, I need to modify how many places? 4 places. I need to go back and look everywhere where I use JDBC DAO. Then I need to modify this. It's a maintenance. Whereas imagine if I am using a Spring framework. If I am using a Spring framework, then what I do in a Spring framework? I won't be doing any new operator. I'll say this. Some name of the object. You got to insert. Delete. Get. Insert, delete, get. Right. You have this part, right? Now, today I am using JDBC DAO. Tomorrow I want to use Hibernate DAO. Is this program getting affected anywhere? No. So your maintenance is much simple. Go to the bean.xml, put a bean tag, ID is something, class is something. Now within this bean tag, what is expected? You are expected to inject an object, either using constructor or whatever. That's it. Today I am using JDBC to use it. Tomorrow I want to use Hibernate. Simply modify this XML. You don't need to go and run behind each and every where you use created object. So if you modify XML, you just need to redeploy your application, and that is also a costly process. Because if you want to redeploy, you have to stop the production. Every time you want to restart your server or you want to redeploy your application, then your production needs to be stopped. So it is costly to stop the server and redeploy or restart your server. So whether you modify XML or whether you modify Java program, it will be a costly process only for us. But thing is, if you modify a Java, if you want to do modifications on a Java program, you need to search each and every Java file to understand the dependencies and modify. Whereas if it is XML, it's very easy. There is only a single file. You just need to open and see what you are supposed to do. The maintenance becomes much easier.
Okay. Okay.
So let's look at the last example for this today's session. Build path, configure build path. I have a lot of files. These are something new. JDBC and transaction. And some database files are there. Add external jars. Antler, DBCP, login, tool. You don't need this. Oh, you also need Hibernate because I'm doing both of them here. Of course, you don't need JSTL. That is for JSP. And I don't know what database I'm using, so I'm adding both the jar files of the database. Beans context. Okay. Beans context. Context support for expression JDBC transaction. That's it. Oh, there's one more. String ORM. So if you look at this again, I have a domain object called forum. You got a forum ID, name and a description. And you got a constructor, setters and getters. Now where is the mapping happening? Look at the XML document. You just did this. You just did this. You have a forum.java and you have a getters and setters and you have a XML. Okay, we'll come back to this part later, XML part. Let's look at this program. JDBC forum DAO. Actually, I have an interface. There are two implementations. There is a JDBC implementation as well as Hibernate implementation. So interface got two methods. Insert forum, select forum. Insert forum, select forum, two methods. And you have a JDBC forum. And you have a method to, I have defined a method actually. I have a method to insert and I have a method to select. I have a method to insert, I also have a method to select. Okay. Now, here, if you observe the pieces of code here, you don't see establishing a connection. You directly do prepared statement. So this is your pure JDBC. Look, you have a query and there is no connection. So somehow you are doing this data source dot get connection, and you have a prepared statement and all the stuff to insert. This is something which you are familiar with. Again here, forum, this is to retry. Now this is called as connection pooling. See, and what I'm trying to do is connection pooling. It has nothing to do with your Spring. It has nothing to do with your Hibernate. So in this XML document, do you observe this bean tag? Of course, it is with the help of Spring Framework you are doing it, but this is called as connection pooling. I added one jar file, if you remember, commands dbcp. So I'm creating a data source object. It is an object of what type? Basic data source by apache.commons. Now in that I'm configuring some properties. Driver, URL, username and password. That's it. So you have a bean tag, right? Data source, and creating an object for basic data source. So what is this basic data source is? We have something called JDBC, and JDBC is available two packages, java.sql, javax.sql. Now in this javax.sql there is an interface. There is an interface, and for this interface, normally this java.sql also got interfaces. The interfaces in java.sql are implemented by whom? Are implemented by respective database vendors. Are implemented by respective database vendors. That is, you have an Oracle implementing those interfaces. You have MySQL implementing those interfaces. You have IBM DB2 implementing those interfaces, right? But who implemented this interface? This implementation is not from database vendors, rather it is given by third party. Not from Java, not from database. Like there is a implementation given by Apache. That's what here. Now what I am doing here, that is needing some properties, that is driver, URL, username and the password. The advantage of this is I don't need to establish a connection. I don't need to establish a connection. By Spring Framework, what you can do? You can just declare a variable and you have a setter method or constructor. That's it. I am injecting that data source object into the class. JDBC forum DAO IMPL. Into this object I am injecting what? Data source object. Into this JDBC forum DAO IMPL, it got a property called data source. I am injecting that object here. I created this object. I am injecting into this. Now in this program, inside a insert method, I am using a data source object to call the get connection method. The moment I invoke this get connection method, it goes back and looks at this XML and sees these four properties: driver name, URL, username and the password. Then it will establish a connection with the respective database. It will establish a connection with the respective database. And rest of the things is same for you. You're already familiar. You know how to insert a record into a database using JDBC. You also know how to retrieve a record from a database using JDBC. But what is the significance of, okay, this is normal thing. Okay? This is your normal thing. Now, look at the other part. The Spring Framework JDBC. JDBC forum DAO I am telling there. That was my normal JDBC. This is my normal JDBC. The only thing is connection is obtained from the XML document. But if I want to use Spring Framework JDBC, you guys need to understand here. Look at the number of lines of code for insertion. Look at the number of lines of code for insertion. Whereas, look at this Spring JDBC. Because your Spring Framework got on something called a template concept. Spring has provided a template. Spring has provided a template called JDBC template. Spring has provided a template concept called JDBC template. Then I am creating a JDBC template object here. I am creating a JDBC template object here. Then see, using the template, I just call an update method to insert a record. See, what is this update method taking? Query. What is the query? Insert into table, column name, column name, column name. There are three values, three question marks. So JDBC template.update, the first argument is query. You have an update method, whereas the first argument is query. And what is the second argument? It's an array of objects. And that array of objects got three values. The first value is an integer value. The second value is a string value. The third value is also a string value. So observe, this is the line which is prominent. So you don't, if you compare your normal JDBC program, what you do? First, you need to load a driver and establish a connection. Because we are using this connection pooling, there is no loading a driver and establishing a connection. Simple, data source dot get connection. Let me enable the line numbers. Normally, the line number 34, if you observe, we load a driver and establish a connection. But here you are not doing it, because you have some data source object from XML. We call it as a connection pooling. Then after that, you have a query, and to that query you are setting the parameters. There are three question marks, you are passing the values for the three question marks. Then you are calling a execute. Then you have a catch block. Then you have a finally block. And you close all the resources. There are same thing if you want to use JDBC template. JDBC template also uses data source to get the connection. But when you want to insert the values into the query, it's much easier. There is a method called JDBC template.update. And this update method is taking a query. That is, the query got three question marks, and for those three question marks you are passing the values with the help of an object array. And that object array is taking three parameters. The first parameter is number, second parameter is string, third parameter is string. That's it, your job is done here. And when it comes to selecting a row, look at our normal Java program. Now our Java program is big. You need to run a select query, set the value for the question mark, execute the query. Then you will have a result set. Get the value from the result set. But here, You just have a method called query for object. Pass the query. That is your first argument. Second argument is the value for the question mark. And third argument is your row mapper. That is, when you fetch a record, you need to map it, right? When you fetch a record, you need to map it. And how do you map it? You need to map it to a forum object. That's what here. So this is called anonymous implementation. Look, you are creating an object, and when you are creating the object, you are opening the flower brace. That is, you are providing the implementation. We spoke about this anonymous implementation earlier. At the time of creation of object, you can implement the method. So that's what I am doing here. At the time of creation of object, I am implementing a method called mapRow. And you are mapping the result set to the forum object inside this method. Yeah. Of course, unless and until you run this program, you won't be you will not have that much clarity. So any questions on what I discussed so far? Alright. If you guys have no questions, I would like to stop here, and I would like to continue in the next class, that is on Monday evening. So I'll be emailing the code samples today, and the yesterday's code samples and today's code samples, and also I'll be uploading the recordings for the yesterday's and today. And just try to go through them and let me know if you have any questions in the next class. Because this is like a new concept, and every time we learn something new only. It's not like the previous cases where we had a concept and we do a big example on it. Here we need to do concept. There are more concepts. So try to spend some time. If you have any questions, we'll discuss in the next class. Yeah, the select query concept, right? Okay, fine. See, I'll tell you here. Look at this one. Yeah. Here we go. So what? You have a select object. No, I didn't do that last day. Last day I didn't send that servlet Hibernate program because I had a poor connection. So I'll be doing it today. Right. Suman, this is what the select one. See, what is happening is you have a select method and you have to return a forum object. So you have a query. So what we are doing here is you need to return a forum object. So we have a method actually. What is that? Is JDBC template dot query for what is that? Okay, just give me a minute. Yeah, query for object. JDBC template dot query for object, because we want the object, right? What is the return type? Forum. Forum is what? Forum is not a primitive data type. Forum is not a primitive data type. Forum is what? Forum is a object type. So I'm picking a method query for object. But if you look at the query got a question mark. So look, I'm picking up this method. The first argument is a query. The second argument is a question mark value. The third one is a row mapper. So the first argument is query. Second argument is what? Question marker. Right. Now here row mapper. Now what is row mapper? It's actually new row mapper. So we have an anonymous implementation to it. Now it wants me to implement this anonymous one. Yeah. You are putting in a row mapper implementation. Yeah. Here we go. We need to override the method. So yeah, there is a method called mapRow. Pick it up. So you have a result set. You have an integer argument. So this is an anonymous implementation. So whatever when you run the select query, you get what? Result set, right? So whatever the data is in the result set, now you need to store it into an object. Alright? Okay. Simple. Here, new forum. What is your first argument? Result set dot get int of 1. You are mapping your result set with Java object. Get string of 2. Result set dot get string of 3. That's it, done. So in this method itself, you pass 3 arguments. First argument is the query which need to be executed, and the query got question marks, so pass the values for the question marks. Now what is your third one is, your result set should be mapped to what? So there is you are creating an object of a row mapper, and it's an anonymous implementation. Within that you are overriding a method. This is called anonymous implementation. Anonymous implementation in the sense, while creating the object you override, and within that you are overriding the method mapRow, and this mapRow method got a result set. That is, when you run the select query, you get a result set. Now that result set is data is stored into a forum object, because my return type is forum. So it's pretty simple, like, you know, if you did your JDBC programs before, our previous JDBC programs, what we used to do, what is the return type of this method? Sorry. What is the return type of this method? When you say get, the return type is user. You are mapping your result set to what? User object, right? Whatever the data is in the result set, you are storing into a user object and returning it. Same thing, what I am doing here is, I am doing it here, inside this overridden method. So instead of writing a separate program, we are doing it here only as an anonymous implementation. Suman, is it clear or still have a question? Yeah, just go through that example and let me know if you have any questions. Alright guys, if no further questions, I would like to stop here, and I will upload the recordings and I'll also forward the code samples today. So if any questions, I'm good to take. Otherwise, we'll catch you in the next session, that is on Monday evening again. Alright, thanks everyone. Catch you in the next session then.